Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. This is a spring edition of my question and answers video. I last did one at the start of winter and I invited you to write your questions. I got a load of those questions to answer in this video, which means if you have any questions for the summer edition, write them down below and hopefully I can answer them. The first question is, are all brassica flower shoots edible? Or are there some exceptions? Well, the good news is that any brassica that you're growing in the garden, the flower shoots are going to be edible because you're going to be eating the leaves. For example, these massive leaves next to me here from overwintered kohlrabi. This will also flower. I can eat the flower shoots. It's a fantastic thing about brassicas. I think that really the only reason why I grow kale these days is to eat the flower shoots of kale rather than the leaves. They're such a lovely crop to have, and especially this time of year they're going to be coming in droves for any that have overwintered. And at the end of the day, what is purple sprouting broccoli? It is a brassica flower shoot. Next question is, if you wouldn't be a gardener / YouTuber, what would you do? I spent most of my childhood wanting to be a policeman on Monday, an ambulance driver on Tuesday. On Wednesday I wanted to be a fireman. On Thursday I wanted to fix all the roads. And on Friday I wanted to do whatever I felt like based on the previous 4 jobs. Then I got into this kind of wanting to be an architect and to design sustainable like eco houses and communities. That's why I first really came across permaculture. I think something along those lines in terms of the architecture side I might have done. How to rotate planting with just a few beds. So I got some good news for you. Crop rotation for the majority of gardens, because we're on smaller scales, it's actually completely unnecessary unless you've suffered a really kind of serious soil-borne like pest or a disease that, for example, club root for brassicas. Any other cases, you don't need to rotate. Crop rotation was developed for when things were being grown on a field scale, but we're not growing on a field scale, we're growing in our beds. And it just adds to confusion. And sometimes if you have a small garden, you might want to always grow all of your leafy greens in the shadier part because sunlight is very precious. You might only have one corner of the garden that is sunny. And so by crop rotating, you're going to have crops that love the sun, that suffer for maybe 3 out of 4 years because they're in the shadier parts. So yeah, just don't worry about crop rotation. In your experience, what is the best way to deter pests? In your experience, what is the best way to deter pests such as mice and rabbits? So things with, say, rodents, whether it's mice, rats, voles, often they have boom years. They have a year where their population really booms and you're like, I don't know how to deal with this. And then the next year, you don't really get many problems. The easiest thing to do if they're affecting your raised beds is just to leave them. They've kind of already created the tunnels. Yes, it's a bit annoying, but plant around them, kind of ignore them. It kind of works. The only issue when they do become a problem is when they're starting to eat all of your seedlings. So in this growing space here in the other polytunnel, we've got a suspended platform where we're propagating all of our peas and beans. So no mice or voles can get to it. It means that we can just propagate our seedlings, plant them outside, no hassle. With rabbits, the only thing that I suggest is to put down rabbit-proof fencing. It's something like 18 gauge rabbit-proof fencing wire. You don't have to dig it a foot into the ground. You can create a lip outwards and then cover with a bit of soil, because the rabbits like to dig up against the boundary and they're just going to be hitting that wire, and that for me has worked the best solution. If you were starting a garden in a completely new climate, what would be your areas of focus for making it a productive space? I like the question. I kind of wish if you asked if I was going to do it in a hot climate or a cold climate or a wetter climate, because unfortunately, the answer is a default. It really depends. Probably the first thing I would do if I was starting in a completely new climate is I'd try and join a local gardening group and just visit other gardens there and get a good sense of it. The main thing is to know if there are going to be frost dates or if there's not, because there's different benefits. If you have a much colder place where you have harder frosts, that I kind of prefer that as an idea, because you have a better kind of start and finish to the end of the year, and it helps deal with a lot of the natural pest and disease issues. I think what I would struggle with is more of a tropical climate. That I'd feel completely out of my depth with that. So I'd need some serious retraining. Yeah, probably do a lot of courses to learn as much as possible. If I've topped up beds with high quality compost, how soon before I should start to think about feeding the soil? Right away, or wait until some of those nutrients have been used up before adding more? This kind of comes down to the whole idea of how much should you mulch your beds annually if you're following no dig. So what I think is anywhere between 2 to up to, if you have it, up to 5 centimeters layer of compost over your raised beds every single year. You can do that towards the end of the season, you can do that in the summer, you can do that at the start of spring. As long as you put down that 1 to 2 inches, you're going to be fine, and you're going to have a really nice amount of nutrients to have successful harvests, providing that the compost is high quality. The only time that I'd recommend in terms of feeding the soil is more thinking about the actual soil life. So what kind of amendments that you can make that can promote a healthy soil, and then usually more towards the midpoint of the season to the second half of the season, that's when I might want to start adding some kind of homemade liquid feeds, for example a weed soak or a nettle feed or a comfrey feed. But really just sticking to compost, you're gonna get great harvests as it is. What are your 2 favourite cucumber varieties and why? Quite like this question. So if I'm just growing cucumbers outside, I'd have to say it is the standard Market's More cucumber here in the UK. Had some really good results with it last year. Now, for growing in a polytunnel, I actually found that a cucumber variety that we grew in this very bed was called Pisander. The reason why that grew so well is that it only creates female flowers, and so you don't have to take off any of the male flowers. You know, it just pollinates itself. You get fantastic fruit. It was such a heavy laden crop, and it was really, we just created some pyramids and grew them and just harvested the cucumbers. I'd never found such an easy variety of cucumber to grow, so I highly recommend trying out Pisander. Have you ever heard of electroculture gardening? No, I haven't. Is that like some kind of like music genre? Oh, here we go. This is interesting. Hi Hugh, any experience with electroculture? Another question. Someone else has asked it. I don't know whether it's just complete woo-woo, like a lot of biodynamics. Don't hate on me for that. But I will do some research. Also, not all biodynamics is woo-woo, just some of it. Which are the first seeds that you sowed in 2023 and at which date? Nice specific question. The first seeds that I sowed was actually on February the 14th when I had set up the hotbed and it was time to sow it, and I sowed things like spinach, radish, turnips, a load of different herbs. Usually I wouldn't sow seeds that early, but because it was a hotbed, it allowed me to scratch that itch. You know, as soon as you hit January, gardeners just want to get sowing, even though it's ridiculously too early. So it is nice to kind of get some seeds in the ground nice and early. Are all your family gardeners too, or is it your own hobby? No, I have to certainly thank my dad primarily for getting me into gardening. I'll also try and find it. I think I have the photo somewhere of me in a red onesie about like this tall, staring at a raised bed. And little did I know that raised beds would become such a big part of my life about 22 years later. My granddad did a bit of gardening as well. He had a little patch where he had some vegetables and some soft fruit. But for me, I just decided to turn it into a job. Do you have any favourite really cold climate gardeners to recommend following? Yes. I don't know how cold is cold. So one I would recommend is Edible Acres, one of my absolute favourite, all-time favourite YouTube channels about gardening and permaculture, self-sufficiency. Edible Acres, absolutely incredible guy. I love the things that he does with chicken composting systems as well. That is a perfect example of putting permaculture in practice where you actually get amazing results. And one name that has come up quite a bit with the work that I've been doing on hotbeds is someone called Dirt Patch Heaven, which I've been aware about the channel, but I'm going to start to watch, I think, her videos and find out more, because she's been using hotbeds to be able to grow food during really, really cold weather. So check out that channel as well. What tools do you use for chop and drop? None of my tools seem to be just right. So it depends on your climate. If you're a tropical climate, you can just kind of chop big leaves and big plants and just leave them as they are. For me, because the weather doesn't quite suit decomposition or the fast breakdown that you get with a tropical climate, I like to give a bit of a helping hand by chopping that material then into smaller bits. And I found that the best is using some hedge shears, and I use a pair of Gardena hedge shears, and I just chop up the material, and that works really well. They stay nice and sharp. They're made for chopping, even tougher things, and I find those really useful. My question for you would be if you've ever thought about adding mushrooms to your garden. This is quite interesting. One of the things that we never really got around to last year, but we've got the stuff and hopefully we can do it this year in polytunnels, is to grow some oyster mushrooms. The other idea is we've been creating a lot of ramial chipwood, and apparently a good inoculant for that, for paths, is to grow wine cap mushrooms. So those are two mushrooms that we're going to be growing, hopefully to then get an edible crop from in our garden this year. Totally new crop for us. I'm really excited. How do you mow the grass between the beds? Nice and simple. I use a strimmer. I think in America they have a fantastic name for it, called a weed whacker. What a name. Yeah, just so I can get right up to the edge. And then for, say, around soft fruit where there's a little bit more space, or around the fruit trees, I then opt for using a scythe. So a question about some materials I read that they might be bad to throw in with the compost. What are your views on composting eggshells, potato peels, citrus peels, banana peels, onion and garlic peels? All of those can go into the compost. I think there's so much terrible composting advice out there on the internet. What you don't want to do is to have a compost bin full of citrus peels, or a compost bin full of potato peels. The key to any good high quality compost is a diversity in nutrients, in terms of a diversity of ingredients that creates that diversity of nutrients. Roughly speaking, you want an equal parts volume of carbon material to an equal parts volume of green material, and you want a mix of a lot of each of those. And you can add all of those in, as well as everything else, and you're never going to run into any problem. So don't worry about it, use them. They're a really valuable resource for you to create your own compost. What's your view on the use of anaerobic digestate on allotments? We have a steady supply of it at our allotment site from a local biomass biofuel site. Is it an alternative to compost or something to add instead of manure? It's a really good question. I've had a little bit of experience with digestate. I think as a bulk material that you can mix with homemade compost, I think that is fine. Using it as a mulch around perennials, I think that is fine. I don't think you can use it to replace manure. Just from my experience with it before, I feel like, just for example, in the other garden where I've planted out some garlic, the worst performing garlic at the moment is the one that has been mulched with digestate. I actually think, thinking about it, it's an organic material, it's been digested already, but I would add it into the composting process along with other things. You can utilize it as a great bulk, but don't see it as like the only source of nutrients or fertility for your garden. What's your next garden project? That's a good question. It's a project that I've started and it's going to take a few months, and then I want to do it every single year. It's hotbeds, and the long story short with hotbeds is that they are a fantastic way of being able to produce food during the hunger gap to start seedlings off really nice and early. And what you're using is you're harnessing the natural heat that comes from the breakdown of organic material to help you grow stuff. And it means that you can start things off much earlier than you can, in fact, in a polytunnel. And if you haven't seen the video, right here is a video all about hotbeds, so you can just see for yourself how amazing they are, especially for small spaces. And don't forget to ask any of your questions down below for the summer Q&A.